So my name's Jen Korn, and as Tanya clearly identified, I'm within the trauma-informed sector, so working with families and young people. Our program aims to get young people under 12 out of residential care and back into safe homes. So it's a fairly big program, but only new to our region. And then my unpaid side hustle is Seek Healthy Families, which is our charity, which I co-founded. I'm currently having 12 months away from the charity, so I can focus on getting my day job up and running, but still very much involved with the awareness in our sector of domestic and family violence. Also, as has been stated, I come with a fairly big trigger warning. I'm going to tell you all a story about a local family, so it's going to hit home. It's about a local family that has had a huge impact on them, which has also had a huge impact on our sector and on our community. So if you need to step outside, Robin will be available. If you need to give her the thumbs up to say you need a bit of support, I'll also be hanging around if there's been any further questions that you might want to ask one-on-one, or if there's been a trigger that you would like to explore further with me. So all of this will link back to our mental health and well-being in a business. I'm just coming at it from a different angle. I'm coming at it from domestic and family violence within the workplace for businesses, managers, pretty much anybody who supervises staff, even if you're another staff member who is a co-member that's seeing what's going on or maybe not seeing what's going on. So our story is about a local woman born and raised in Rockhampton, murdered by her husband. They have 3 beautiful children. The impact on our sector was huge. So her name is Karen Gilliland, and in June of 2020, she, in her rental with her 2 daughters there, with the family's 2 daughters, was brutally murdered by her husband. A strange husband. They'd been separated for a very short time, while their son was in the family home because he was still residing with Dad because Dad wouldn't let him return to Mum. So on that night of the murder, we then had 2 young girls who witnessed in cold blood their mum being murdered by their dad. They then have their bigger brother, who was still only young, they're all under 16, was sitting at home in the family home wondering where was Dad, what was going on. He was completely unaware until ambulance and police arrived at his door to say, hey, unfortunately your mum has now been passed away, murdered, and your dad is in hospital unsure what his outcome is going to be. Due to the fact that this was domestic and family violence, this family had no family. The perpetrator, or Dad, had completely isolated the family from every friend, work colleague, family member, so they had no connection. So we had to wait for family from Hervey Bay to drive up to then support the children through what can only be expressed as something that you would hope that nobody would, even as adults, that we would never have to go through. And here's 3 young children who have experienced every part of that trauma, and the trauma ongoing. Dad, also in front of the girls, tried to take his own life. So the young girls, and I suppose I should have started with all this with, I have consent. So I work with the family. I see the family every week. I've become a really big part of their life. This family and these kids need some really positive input into their life. They're being raised by Karen's mum, so Cheryl, and by Cheryl's husband, which is stepdad, and by their uncle Brian. So 3 adults had to move from Hervey Bay up to Rockhampton, and they're now raising 3 teenagers, which is tricky in itself, raising 3 vibrant teenagers, let alone 3 teenagers who are now impacted by trauma. Karen's stories and the children is huge domestic and family violence. Both her and her husband worked full-time for Queensland Health, and again, Queensland Health is very much aware that I talk about their workplace while I'm out and about, so I'm not talking out of school. Queensland Health has and had some awesome policies and procedures in place, really solid policies and procedures, and they're even better now. So since that there's been some really huge changes, they've made changes to keep up to date as well. Unfortunately, Karen didn't have the strength and wasn't brave enough to go to her manager, who I've met and is an amazing manager and person, and say, hey, this is what's happening for me, I need some support. What we didn't find out until after her murder, until we actually went through the whole court process was that her husband had a threat over her that if she went to anybody, if there was any sniff of anybody knowing what she was going through, he would murder her family. So sitting above everything, he wanted ultimate control, and he had that. He checked her phone every day. He had control of the money. He wouldn't let her go out. She wasn't allowed to attend work functions. He had to know where she was every single minute, every day. She wasn't allowed in the yard. No physical stuff was going on. So in her workplace, she was just a slightly stressed mum with 3 teenagers, they weren't teenagers at that point, going to work every day. No one knew what was actually going on behind the scenes. So she was a actual full, intense victim, and so were the children. So her partner or husband has now been sentenced, and he got a life sentence, mainly due to the fact that the children witnessed the event. So he's been granted with no parole at this point. He will be able to appeal it and stuff, but at this point he won't ever be released. So and I suppose now getting to the information that I want you all to know about, when the government started talking about bringing in the legislation around domestic and family violence and the 10 paid leave days, I could not have been happier. I signed every petition. I wrote to every politician who may have had the sniff of information, input. And then when it got announced, I was amazed. So for those who are in the sector, it's huge. It makes such a huge difference and will make a difference. And Karen's story is one of those. So linking all that together with the legislation and Karen's story, she could only do things on her RDO. Because again, every time she went to do anything, if her husband found out, there was going to be consequences for her family. So on her RDO, she was attempting to get things done. Finally, she decided to leave. She'd had lots of times of trying to leave, and he just continued to say, if you don't come back, there'll be consequences. And she was aware what those consequences were going to be. So within her workplace, she was trying to get some of these things done. Finally, she publicly announced that she was done, she was out, she was leaving. Did the right thing, contacted police, but what she didn't, and still wasn't brave enough to do, because that threat was still in the back of her mind, she didn't tell police what was actually going on. So she just said to police, I want to leave this relationship, I want to take the children. Police said, and rightly so, Dad has to give consent for you to take those children. Of course, Dad said no. She had to leave that night without her children because, again, she didn't feel confident enough saying what was going on because that threat was still there. Her family put her up in a motel for a little while. Eventually, she was allowed, Nigel allowed her to have the girls because they weren't coping. They were crying, they weren't going to school. He couldn't manage and control them, but he kept Saul, the son, because he still needed to have something over her. So Saul stayed with him in the family home. The 3 girls, or mum and the 2 girls, so the 3 girls were living in a motel. She couldn't get to open house. She desperately wanted to be in a house of her own. But again, she was only working around her RDO, which was once a fortnight. Every time she went to go for a house, for a rental, it was gone because she couldn't get there in time. She couldn't get to court. She couldn't get to counselling because she was doing it only around one day every fortnight. So this new legislation with the 10 days is huge. She would have been able to just say to her boss, I'm in a DV relationship and there's a few hoops to jump through. I need a day off to go to court. I need to go to counselling. I need to go and look at a house. So eventually her family bought her a little car. They were running backwards and forwards from Harvey Bay, just doing eyes on, keeping a check. Again, they had no concept about what was going on because, again, she was still under that threat. They got into a little house. Saul was allowed to come for visits, but ultimately had to go back to Dad every time because that was his control. And he was losing control. She was starting to get the girls enrolled in stuff. She had a new phone, she had a new phone number, she had her own bank account, she had her own little house, her own little car, and she was starting to get established. She was murdered, and then in the night, 2 days later, she'd had her Centrelink appointment to start looking at all her family tax benefits and stuff. And again, it had been an appointment that she'd had to work around with Centrelink for 6 weeks to try and get because it had to fit with her RDO. So that's, again, where the legislation is so important now because victims are going to get some flexibility around workplaces and around working through their needs. So that's the end of the story bit. Because the domestic and family violence, not only does it have a huge financial impact, it does, and there's lots of stats and it's this many billion and million, but that the stats change. They're not always completely right because we don't always have a full picture. So not only financially, but it also has the mental health and well-being impact. So imagine being a victim. You've got your perpetrator is constantly texting you, where are you, what are you doing, you're phoning, so you're not focused, your productivity level is down lower, you're not interacting with your colleagues because you know that you'll never be able to go to a function with them. So you don't build relationships. So all of a sudden you're isolated within your own team, you're isolated from your family. All that then has an impact on your business, it has an impact on your other staff. The other staff are like, oh, we don't want to get friendly with her, she doesn't want to have anything to do with us. Managers are wondering, oh, I don't know what's wrong, like just there's something, I just can't put my finger on it. So loss of productivity, and then that victim feels left out, isolated, all the things, and then leaves. So it's also that constant having a turnover of staff, and again, new workplace for that person, they have to start all over again. So what you might see as a manager or as a business owner or even just somebody who's supervising staff is exactly that they're constantly on their phone. But it's because they're checking in with their person, because that person is like, where are you, what are you doing for lunch, what are you planning, what time are you going to be home? So it looks like they're being really distant from their workplace and they're just on their bloody phone all the time. They're not. And again, that not going to functions, work functions, not making any connection with their colleagues. It may be that they have no money. It may be that you're doing raffles and stuff and they never take part in any of that. It's not because they don't want to, it's because they can't. So again, there was nothing physical. There is no way Karen's colleagues or her managers would have ever known, because Nigel never touched her. He touched her emotionally, psychologically, via the children and through threats. So that's, I suppose, the big, used to always be, oh, you'd be able to tell when someone's being beaten up by their partners because they're having the bruises. It's so much more than that now. So it's a matter of, as managers, being really aware and being brave to ask the question. Like, what's going on for you? Bring them into your office, ask them, is something else going? It might be just be that their kids are at home and they're sick and partner's working away. It may be all really explainable, but you may be able to do the breakthrough by letting them know that you care and you actually want to know what's going on for them. So what can you do? Someone who has an impact, you can have so much of a bigger impact. So be non-judgmental. When someone comes to you with that really brave information, be respectful, be courteous, be really confidential. As a victim, you don't want to be in the tea room and having someone talking about someone, oh, it's in a DV relationship, because that's you and you'll never come forward with anybody. Take it seriously. It's a really hard topic to come up to someone and say, hey, I'm in a DV relationship. So take it seriously. Within the workplace, be really clear about your stance on domestic and family violence, and especially what your business's stance and also your personal stance. Have really strong and usable policies and procedures. Don't just have some airy-fairy policy that now relates back to the legislation, which is about 10 days. Have some really solid information in there about, as a business, this is how we will support you if you are going through this. Be flexible, especially now with the 10 days, you have to be. You're legislated now to be flexible. So, but do it with heart and empathy. Don't do it because you're now being made to. Talk about domestic and family violence in the workplace. Have flyers in their kitchen. Don't make it a taboo subject that victims are made to think that it is. Take part in domestic and family violence awareness campaigns. There are so many for managers. There's the CEO Challenge the Daylight to Darkness. There's Domestic and Family Violence Month, which is May. You're in a sector and in a community that really puts a lot of emphasis on Domestic and Family Violence Month. Get involved. Turn your office purple. Do whatever it needs to be to let your staff know that you have an investment in domestic and family violence. Allow staff to take part in training. There is so much free training. DV Alert is one of them. It's run by Lifeline. There's the DV Workaware. There's Mate. There's heaps. And then keep up to date. So I just did a 5-minute Google on domestic and family violence in the business sector, and there is so much information available. There is no reason that you aren't up to date with what legislation is, what constitutes domestic and family violence, where you can get help. It's all there. It's really clear and easy to access. There's really no excuse. And The last little bit is about locally, so in our sector and in our community, where can you go to get help? So Catholic Care is our funded domestic and family violence agency. Counselling, all sorts of stuff, safety devices, they're your pretty much a one-stop shop. Then you've got lots of other agencies around that have little bits of support, whether it be housing or helping someone get a new postbox or a bank account. So you have a plethora of agencies, and then you've got all your other charities, and obviously Seek Healthy Families is one of them, but there are so many other charities around that support not only businesses, but they'll support you to support your workers. So don't be afraid. I suppose my biggest thought is, and what I'd like to leave you with is, don't be afraid to have that conversation with someone. Yeah, it's not an easy conversation to start, but be brave, because they're going to have to be a whole lot braver than what you are to actually tell you what's going on for them. And your workplace, so your mental health and well-being is all based around how you relate, support and interact with your staff, and especially your staff that are experiencing domestic and family violence, because it's a huge toll on them mentally as well at their home, but in their workplace as well. That's it. Well done, Mark. I'd like to say any questions, but I'm hoping I'm out of time.
No, you're never out of time.
Yeah, and if you don't have the right language, own it. So if someone comes to you, and just be really open and say, hey, look, I don't really know the correct language to use, but I want to support you, I want to believe you, I want to help you. So yeah, you can keep the language really, really simple. But yeah, you've just got to own that we don't all work in the sector full time, so we don't all have the right words and language to use. But the I believe you and I want to help you and I want to support you is pretty much the first three statements to start off with. Yeah, the bonus of a 16, 17, 18, even 15-year-old is they're going to talk about it. They're pretty good. So what we've found from the young people that we are working with is they talk a lot better to their friends, whether it be via text or via Snapchat. So just giving everybody the knowledge. So if someone, I suppose with the younger people, it's about educating their friends. So educating as a whole, so that if someone comes to them and says, this has happened, how can you help me? They've got the skills then to go forward. And the symptoms are all the same. It's just they're on their phone. It might be that someone's checking in on them. A lot of our young people, it's quite physical, so you may actually notice the bruises and the fingerprints. They're pretty good at, from what we've found, our young people are pretty good at admitting what's going on. A whole lot better, because they don't have children to protect and to nurture. Reaching out to an adult is a whole lot easier for some of our young people. So it's all the same. It's just that they use social media. So skilling up our young people to help when young people come to them. And I suppose it depends. Are they the one? Is it the parents that are using? Yeah. So it's about, again, giving them support, offering to be their safe adult, and then child safety notifications, police, depending on how severe it is. So all that legislatively stuff around people being young, but giving them the skills, linking them in with locally Headspace, Kids Helpline. So giving them then the professionals to chat to, so that they can then work out a safety plan, and then even go through a safety plan with them about, okay, so when that's happening, what do you do? Do you need to go to someone's place? Do you need to call me? Do I need to come and get you? So building a bit of a safety plan, and there's plenty of us that can help build that with the young people if you ever need support. There's lots of studies that are being done, but nothing ever seems to get finished. So when you go and you look at all the research, and I'm constantly trying to find what's the trigger, what's the reasoning. Even there's been some really great research done around, and this is around men as perpetrators, because we know men are our highest rate of perpetrators, about what's going on for them internally, whether it's something to do with their childhood, what are the triggers. So there's so much research going on, but no one ever seems to come to a conclusion at the end.
I don't understand that.
Yeah, I try being in the sector. Yeah, so there's no, and I think for every incident, it's different. So for someone, it may be that there's mental health involved for the perpetrator. It may be that he or she is just a mean person and uses domestic and family violence, because domestic and family violence is all about control. So it's about one person having ultimate control over another in about 9 different forms is how it can happen. So that's what it all is. How we get to that and what the triggers are, what triggers that person to use domestic and family violence is different for everybody. But yeah, heaps of research, but no one seems to come to a decent conclusion.
Who conducts that research?
So the university in New South Wales, Griffith? No, they're Queensland? Yeah, Yes, so Griffith has done a heap of research. They have a domestic and family violence team. CQU has a domestic and family violence research division based in Mackay. So they're doing some awesome research, and they roll their results and stuff out via conferences every year. So yeah, just jump online and have a read and a research, and yeah, it's one part. Yeah, and again, it just depends. For Karen and Nigel, there was no alcohol, there was no drugs, there was no work pressure, there was no financial pressure. He just chose to use domestic and family violence to control his family. That's it. Nothing more. We've got this one across. Oh, there is. So we've got this one across the line, which took us a fair while. The next one we're doing is the coercive control. So Queensland has running with that, and Shannon Fentiman has been a massive push, and that's come about from Hannah Clark's family pushing that. It's nothing happens easy, and it's more than legislation. It's a part. We need to go right back to the start and look at why is this happening? What makes one person think that control is a way to go rather than another family who doesn't have domestic and family violence involved? So I wish I had answers. It would make my life, my job and my sector so much easier if there was answers, but we just do what we do, and we just keep looking for changes and keep advocating for our families. Yes. So financial is one of the 9 that are like 9 forms of domestic and family violence. It's tough. As a male is a victim of domestic and family violence, you've got the whole sector against you, you've got the stats against you, you've got the shame that goes with being a victim of domestic and family violence, and then you've got all the mental health stuff that goes with it as well. So if they are local, or between here and Longreach, I'd recommend that they get in contact with Catholic Care, and a caseworker can actually take them through the steps of what they need to do, whether they need to identify it and get a protection order in play. The other aspect is that there's the men's helpline, so it's for perpetrators and for male victims as well. So, and it's staffed by counsellors. They can make referrals. So, and it's from I think 9 a.m. till midnight. So they're a great source for our males that are victims. It's hard to find support for men. It really is. Yeah. But yes, financial abuse does sit under the legislation as a form of domestic and family violence. Oh, thank you. Yeah. And the other thing that I suppose we publicise, and I know that we were talking about the reasons behind it, there is never an excuse for abuse. There's triggers, there's reasons that our perpetrators feel are the reason for how they behave, but flat line is there is never an excuse for abuse. That's simple. Yeah. And I can give you a safety plan that you can actually work through with your worker. The biggest thing is self-care for you, because you're vicariously living through all that. So you're going home feeling unwell, feeling sick, you're taking that home as well. So self-care for you, and the mental health and well-being for yourself as well is important. So you need to put you first. Agencies and in the sector, we can put some safety plan around her. We can give you some more skills to support her to do that, but we can do lots of linkages for you so that you're not sharing all that burden on your own. But we get to have awesome outcomes. I get to now hang out with 3 amazing teenagers. Mine have all left home, so I've literally got now 3 young teenagers, new set of grandparents, uncle, and they're all trying to do their best. But for me, that's the silver lining. It was horrendous what they went through, but I've got this whole other family now that I get to be part of, and I get to support, and I get to do events, and I get to tell their story every chance, and because they don't want another family to go through this. So if we can help put a safety plan around and give you the skills and give your worker the support, it's a win. It's a win for our sector, it's a win for a family, and it's a win for your business as well. And that's it. The biggest risk is when they first leave, which is exactly what Karen's story was. She'd only been gone about 8 weeks when she was murdered. So it's that first couple of months when things are changing and the perpetrator's losing control, and then it continues. And it's being brave and having that conversation, depending on what your relationship with that person is. It may be that as a manager, as a co-worker, you just leave some stuff lying around, and then use domestic and family violence as part of some conversation in the kitchen. So you're not directly saying, hey, I think you're a victim of domestic and family violence, but what you can let them know is that you're aware of domestic and family violence, that you could support somebody, that you have the skills, that you've got the links, that you believe someone. So you can be very all third party. And so then your person is getting the idea that, oh, this person, they're going to listen to me, they know a little bit about support. Or you can just up in front, if you've got a good enough relationship, and say, hey, I'm not sure what's going on in your relationship. I'm worried about you. I want to know, is there anything I can do? What's going on? And even if they go, no, it's all fine, there's something going on, it's going to be in the back of their mind. The next incident, the next time their bank account is empty, they're like, oh, well, I've got this person at work who seems to know a little bit, is prepared to care, and it may be that they'll then come forward to you. But it's practices as a whole in a workplace. That if we put it out there, that we know what we're talking about, and that we're willing to support, it will eventually seep through to people. But if you're wanting something to happen quick, have the direct conversation. Or another thing you can do is print out like Catholic Care's number or any of your local agencies and just drop it on their desk or just slip it to them. There's lots of really indirect ways that you can bring it up as well. And if you need to, you can come and see me as well. That's open to everybody. Because, again, it's a rough conversation to have off the bat with someone when you're not entirely sure. Done. Awesome. Thank you.